HR people of Reddit, what's the most NSFW or WTF reason someone got fired from your place of employment? A guy I worked with was fired because he worked 3 full-time jobs, and it turned out he was sleeping for 6 hours on his shift. This was on night shift at a Home Depot. He used supplies from the store to build himself a platform above the rug cutting machine, and had a whole setup he slept in for almost a year, until he was caught climbing in the machine on camera. We all just thought he was shitty at the job and wasn't getting anything done. He is secretly my hero. I had a job like this in high school. Was a gas station, and they always staffed it with 2 people, even though 1 was enough. So, on weekends, I'd sign up for double shifts, and so would the manager. In the morning, he'd let me go sleep in the back office and stockroom. I wasn't a morning person, and had been up late the night before. He'd then sleep during the second shift, and I'd run shop. Watching porn on his work computer, while pleasuring himself in his office. With clear glass windows, I'd like to add. I've seen similar. One of the engineering drafters got walked in on playing some serious pocket pool watching porn, and immediately dismissed. Later the same day, someone else in the office read his Facebook as having been laid off because of the economy. I worked at an amusement park when I was in my teens, and one of the guys they hired to work the game booths was regularly trading the large prizes for B jobs. He'd go on break, get a BJ, then have the woman come up, and he'd pretend they won. Management caught him giving away prizes, thinking he was just giving them away as flirting. But he proudly told them that he traded them for B jobs. He was 17, the average age of the women were 30 plus, and the giant stuffed bear cost $7 wholesale. Had a girl yelling at me after I fired her husband. He was a manager at one of my stores. He told her we fired without cause because we were losing money. I let her go on for several minutes, insulting the company, threatening to sue us, and all that. Then I let her know he was fired for sexual harassment of a minor. A 17-year-old asked him to get something off a shelf for her. He said, "Only if you suck my D first," with 4 witnesses. A bit of realization set in her face, and she walked out without saying anything. She was maybe 24 years old. Her husband was 36. They had 3 kids. The oldest was maybe 6 to 7 years old. That reminds me of the time I had to fire an employee, sustained poor performance, nothing exciting. He was actually a nice guy, just not cut out for the job, and his girlfriend and future wife started loudly telling everyone that I fired him because she wouldn't go out with me years before. We had flirted for like 5 minutes, years before, but I quickly realized she was cray-cray and walked away, and started marching to HR, like she was on a crusade. It was chilling. Fortunately, HR knew she was lying. After I left the company, I heard she was cheating on nice guy with a director, who was taking her on all his business trips. Apparently everyone knew, and she was given the codename, Laptop. The director's flying to Tucson tomorrow. Oh? Is he taking his laptop? Of course. I think one, or both of them, were eventually fired, or low-key, let go. I had to let a guy go from a production line. This was in a small jerky plant, and most of the people on the hand pack line were women. I hired this guy, he presented not crazy like some others, and things were good for a week. The second week there, he didn't like that he couldn't sit until breaks, so he started telling the ladies on the line that he knows how to kill and skin a human, and nobody would miss them in this small town. The women all rushed my office at break, and I had to call the police before I called him to the plant manager's office. As soon as the offending guy walked in, he said, "I knew them bitches would say something." This plant is majority woman run. I looked at the plant manager, she nodded, and I told him that we had to let him go due to the disturbing things he said, and that he has also trespassed from the plant grounds. The officer followed him out to his car, and that was the last we saw of the guy. He called 2 weeks later, asking if he can drop off fundraiser items people bought before he was let go. I told him to leave them at the police station. The items were never dropped off. The people that gave to him were reimbursed by the plant owner. It wrapped up nicely, but at the same time, what the hell? Guy was running a side business, producing adult calendars. Got caught because our sysadmins noticed he was soaking up some ridiculous fraction of our bandwidth. He was downloading astronomical amounts of porn. I fired him on the spot, and had him escorted from the building. Then I instructed my secretary to clean out his desk and box up his belongings. She walks out of my office and over to his cubicle. Comes back to my office, 30 seconds later, and says, "Nope." Dumbest reason ever. Lazy salesperson parked in a handicapped parking spot, while visiting a customer. Got a ticket. Tried to get the customer company to pay the ticket. Finally, asked, if ticket could go on expense account. LOL. That one, went all the way up to the CEO. Fired that Friday. Obligatory not HR, but. Some dude got fired for poor performance. He had just gotten a new laptop, which was on his desk, and happened to have his old laptop still, which was kind of junky and sitting at his house. So, dude got a woman he knew, who still worked there to go to the office the next day, which was a Saturday, and swapped his old laptop for his brand new laptop. The office building had security cameras in the lobby, and you had to scan to get on the elevators, and at the main doors to our offices on our floors, so, when IT went to secure the laptop on Monday, realized, it was not the new laptop they were expecting, remembered it being there on Friday, because they checked, after firing the guy, well, it took 3 minutes, to put everything together. So, numbnuts not only got himself fired with his shit performance, he also got his friend fired for stealing his laptop. And yes, they made him give the laptop back. Had a co-worker, we'll call him Larry, and he's from an Eastern European ex-superpower. Larry was a real piece of work, would come in with like chains, crazy bling rings, and jewelry, pimp hat, the works. Well, one day I'm sick, and when I come back the next day, I hear someone had said something awfully misogynistic in the team group chat, but it's since been deleted. A few more days go by, and as I'm walking to the bathroom, I run into Larry, who is wearing his general getup of ridiculous attire. I tell him, "Good morning, Larry," and he responds with, "Hey, spider bubble, F you." Realizing he's joking around, I tell him, "Well, your shoes look like shit." He's wearing one bright neon green sneaker, and one bright neon pink sneaker. They did in fact, look like shit. A few days go by, and I get called into HR, for insulting a co-worker's clothing. Nothing came of that. But it was odd. A month or so after this, Larry gets fired, for reasons not publicly shared, but that evening, we go to have drinks with a few co-workers, and someone had invited Larry. We get some drinks, and I eventually get to talking to Larry. He admits that I got called into HR, because he reported me to deflect, because that day, he got called into HR for saying some shit in the group chat. He then admits that this job was just whatever for him, because before he used to run a brothel out of an RV. He loves prostitutes, he tells me, and while we were working together, he would spend half his paycheck every month, one paycheck per 2 weeks, roughly $1,500 to $2,500, on a single night with a prostitute, because look at me, I can get girls that are like a 6, but when you pay for it. Then he kept saying how much he would love to get with our Indian co-worker, continuously calling her Vishnu. That was not her name, it wasn't close, but did start with V. I asked him what he was going to do now that he's out of a job, to which he replied that, well, I can't stay at my apartment, I just got in a fist fight with my landlord. After probing that story, turns out his landlord is a woman, a veteran, and he instigated the fight by punching her in the face. He also mentioned, he couldn't go back to his home country, because he is a deserter from the army, as he joined and deserted shortly before taking this job in the US. Not sure where Larry is now, but he was crazy. Not HR, but I had someone fired for trying to poison me. Found out about it, because she drew pictures of herself doing it to me, and people I know. There were other drawings of her, stabbing me, and putting me to sleep forever, and robbing me. The kicker? She signed, and dated, every drawing. I'd known this woman for 20 years prior. This was completely out of nowhere. QA manager fired, for rubbing one out on his car, over lunch break, caught on surveillance video. Analytical chemist group leader fired, for calling her staff a fat, lazy, N-word. HR director fired, for streaming Netflix all day long, and her door was closed all day long. She was literally employee number 3 at a company that ended up with 100s, and thought she was untouchable. IT director fired, for botching up a software changeover, and crippling 95% of computers for days. Facilities engineer fired, for banging logistics girl in the mezzanine. She was married to another guy that worked there. She kept her job, but not her marriage. Edit, forgot to mention, this all happened within 5 years at one company, in NC. This was back in 2014. I worked at a call center in San Diego. A bunch of new temp hires just finished their mandatory 2-week training, and was starting their first real day on the job. Mixed group of folks, one of them was a roughly 24-year-old man, who had no previous job experience. We sat in an open floor plan call center, meaning no cubicles, with people sitting next to you, behind you, and in front of you. Well, a woman on the team who sat next to this guy asked management to move her, didn't really explain why, other than she just wanted to be placed somewhere else. They moved her next to me, and we quickly became work buddies. I leave shortly after as I had found better employment. Well, guess what? She calls me one morning cracking up, because the guy was arrested at the job that morning. Literally like 10 minutes into his shift, the police were there. Turns out, I'd been documenting the amount of porn he's been watching on computers, downloaded gigs, and even jerked off a couple times at work. I am an HR person, and I could write a book on the topic, but there are two that stick out in my mind. First was a case of sexual harassment, where a male employee, standing next to another male employee, beckoned a female employee to come over to him, by doing the come hither motion, with his hand and finger. When she came over, he said to her, at full volume, "Wow, if I can get you to come over here with one finger, imagine what I could do with two." Second was a case where the only cash register at a location was stuck shut. One employee took it upon himself to take a hammer, and beat the shit out of the register until it opened, breaking it, and then proceeded to take all the money out of it. All of this was on video, by the way. When confronted with this, his defense was, "I thought, if I got it open, I could keep the money," despite no one saying anything remotely close to that. Not in HR, but an infamous story from my first call center job. One of the workforce supervisors was at the company holiday party, and got really drunk. He had a history of alcohol issues. He started to act out, and began to hit on another supervisor's wife, loudly. Eventually, that supervisor, who was his friend, and who was known for being very large and strong, basically put him in a gentle bear hug, to try to physically remove him from the situation and room, and avoid any more embarrassment and awkwardness. The drunk workforce supervisor wiggled free, and went under a long table where some of the food was set up. He crawled under the whole length of the table, barking like a dog, and then came out from under the table, and bit one of the HR generalists on her leg. This workforce supervisor was hired on at my new company, a few years later, and was horrified that I was there from our old employer, and begged me not to tell anyone what had happened. He had gotten himself cleaned up, fortunately. Not in HR, but had been promoted to head counselor in a children's camp I used to work at, years ago. 2 counselors, 18 female and 19 male, that were staying in a camp, sleeping in the tents with their teams of kids, decided to have sex. This was not allowed on campgrounds, obviously. There were more than 5 places where they could have sex without getting caught. They decided it was a great idea to do it in the tent, while a bunch of 5 to 6-year-old kids were sleeping. A little girl woke up, saw them, and ran away screaming, because she thought the guy was choking her counselor. So, in the middle of the night, we all rushed out of our tents, because a child was screaming, and saw the girl running, her counselor chasing her to calm her down, half naked, with her breasts still hanging out, and the guy counselor chasing after them, yelling at them to be quiet. They were fired on the spot. I had to make up something to calm the poor kid down, and deal with her, understandably, furious mother, in the morning. Fired a guy for not showing up for 2 or 3 days straight. When he finally did like nothing happened, I asked him what was up, and he casually just said, "Oh, I accidentally took too much Xanax, and passed out for 2 days." Let another guy go, after he failed to return from his weekend vacation I'd given him time off for. Not answering phone, no one knew where he was. I was worried, and ended up calling his emergency contacts, and it turns out, he was in rehab, not on vacation. He was gone for like 2 weeks before I found out what was actually going on. Told him straight up, if he had told me what was going on, he'd have a job, but instead he has a lesson. RIP that dude. Buddy fired a gal, who had worked at the place for 10+ years, for drinking all the vanilla extract. Gallons of it, for years. He was doing inventory, it was a popular breakfast place/bakery, and realized, they went through about 500% more vanilla, than they ever actually used. Checked cameras, found her drinking it, all day long. He fired another couple dudes, for a scam they had been running for years themselves. 2 friends, one worked days, one worked nights. Day guy would click himself in the AM, then instead of clocking himself out when he left, clock his buddy in. 2 hours later, his buddy would show up for work, clock the first guy out instead of clocking himself in, and then clock himself out at close. They each got an extra 2 hours a day, every day, for like 5 years. Don't know who was running the place before he got there, but damn. I got an honorable mention, since this guy kept his job, after I verified his ridiculous story. Dude shows up 7 hours late for his shift, saying he was locked in a cave. Turns out, he and a friend actually got locked in a cave, and would have been there all night, if one of the employees' tourist attraction cave system hadn't come back to get something. I'm not in HR, but I used to work with a guy who was universally reviled. I'll call him Creepo, because he was incredibly creepy, with a dead stare, and skin the queasy color of buttermilk. Most people at that job were some flavor of mentally ill and unfortunate looking, though. So, I wasn't sure why he was so uniquely hated. One guy was fired for putting nails in his tires, which wasn't a very bright thing to do when there were cameras in the parking lot, but he turned out to be a vigilante hero. Creepo was a pedo, with reams of CP on his computer at home. He was also charged with assaulting a 13-year-old girl. He's rotting in prison now. Not HR, and no longer with the company, but one woman was fired after accusing another employee of stealing her meds. She posted it on Facebook and tagged the store manager. Whole ass investigation went off. Thing is, she had a habit of forgetting she took her meds. And when the manager went to check things out, he found a few pills that had fallen out of her bag under the lockers. So, he was, A, pissed she accused someone so publicly, and B, that our porter didn't clean under the lockers. She was escorted off the premises by LP. They got involved because of the very public nature of her accusations. Oh hell yes, I actually have an answer to one of these. I used to work at a magazine publishing company. I was pretty close friends with the editor of one of our health magazines. She was really good at her job, and a kind person. I was absolutely floored when I came to work one day to learn that she was fired. Turns out that in the dark recesses of our magazine library, she and one of the graphic designers were having full-blown intercourse. What makes matters worse is, she was fired a day after a bunch of us just returned from a weekend out of state for her wedding with another man. She's still married to that man, and has a couple of kids now. I know he knows. But I haven't been in contact with them for many years now, outside of seeing the occasional social media post. About 6 or 7 of us in the office went to the wedding, and boy, did we feel very conflicted about it afterwards, once we learned why she was fired. And for what it's worth, I didn't know the graphic designer, who was also fired, very well. He was a quiet guy who did his job. I rarely conversed with him. In terms of how they were discovered, as far as I know, she was talking to other co-workers about what she was doing on our work messaging platform, similar to Slack, but not Slack. I couldn't believe how idiotic somebody could be to talk about something like that on a company channel. It's like she wanted to be caught. He won Employee of the Year. As the HR person, I was supposed to go with him, so the conference where he and the other award winners would be honored. 2 weeks before we were supposed to travel to Albany, he disappears. Totally out of character. We tried everything to get in touch with him. We called for a welfare check by police. We called his emergency contact, who cursed me out, then hung up on me. Nothing. I was checking newspaper articles to see if they found a dead body that fit his description. Anything I could think of. Finally, I decided to do a database search of the prisons. Found him. Locked up for second-degree RP. It was one of those person you'd least expect situations. Gentle, soft-spoken dude. Wild. Not HR, but supervisor in a meat department. We had to fire a closing clerk and meat cutter because they decided to 1. Steal a bottle of vodka from our liquor store. 2. Drank the entire bottle of vodka between the two of them. 3. Got into a water fight using our industrial hose and cleaning solvent hose. 4. Destroyed $5,000 worth of electronics in the water fight. 5. Realized they were soaking wet and decided to strip down to their undies, put on butcher coats to hide that fact. 6. Put their soaked clothes on a food rack and pushed it into our walk-in oven to dry their clothes. 7. Attempt to finish their shifts while wearing nothing but boxers and butcher coats and completely hammered. 8. Did all of the above between 7 to 9 in the afternoon while the store was still open and with customers and other staff watching.